Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the 3D consciousness and what are some of the examples of aspects that are keeping us bound and tied to this lower experience of life. Now, you may have heard of 3D consciousness. It is a more dense and lower form of our existence. This is where we can find ourselves in basic survival mode. This is where we can be tied to fear, anger, resentment, revenge, greed, anything that is also ego-driven as far as a persona. Now, this has been termed as 3D consciousness as it is very limiting when compared to something of a 5D consciousness, which is very expansive, it's multidimensional, and moving us into 5D consciousness is forgiveness, it's unconditional love, it's radical trust. So we're right in this middle point here, and some of us already are moving into that 5D consciousness, but we do have to make sure we're addressing the 3D to understand really what are the key elements to this lower existence of our reality, this lower form of consciousness. Now, aspects of this lower form of consciousness are basically tied to our survival needs. It ties to fear. It ties to fear of our body, health issues. It ties us and binds us to material possessions, holding on to stories of the past, our ego-driven desires, our personas, and of course, all of the more negative, harsher emotions that are tied and associated with fear, including anger, resentment, shame, even grief and guilt. So I'm going to cover all of these in great detail. I'm going to be very specific as to what is keeping us tied to this lower form of existence, this lower form of reality, knowing that we can relate to all of these. We are human. We are all going through many of these experiences right now. But by understanding and identifying these key aspects of what is truly connecting us to this lower form of existence, we will begin to unravel from them. We will begin to let them go so that we can evolve. Now, when I mention these, do not get frustrated if you are going through or experiencing some of these patterns. This is the exercise of observation. This is the hopes of my channel, is to shine light on some of these more shadowy aspects of ourselves, of humanity, and with the hopes of us evolving past it so that we can form a more compassionate and more evolved society so that we can all move into this 5D consciousness. Hopefully, maybe not all, but you watching definitely are probably most likely on the path, or at least a little bit curious about the possibilities or what this is all about. So as I mentioned, a brief overview of 3D consciousness is the state of being stuck in physical reality, dominated by survival instincts, materialism, and ego-driven desires. So as I mentioned, I'm going to give some specific examples of what emotions, what stories, what thoughts can be tying us into this 3D lower density experience. And do remember, these stories, emotions, thoughts, experiences, we all experience them, and they are tied to past experiences, childhood programming, false beliefs. Now remember that also false beliefs have been incorporated and ingrained since early life and have been carried through, if you want to consider past life beliefs that have not been yet addressed, will follow through into this lifetime. They will come from family beliefs passed down from generations. They will come from societal beliefs and pressures and indoctrinations. They will come from stories that we have developed throughout our entire life that become part of our ego, part of our persona. The process of unraveling from these stories and from these beliefs is quite an undertaking. So if you are experiencing, as I mentioned, any of the examples that I'm going to give here, allow yourself time and commitment and grace to move through this, because it is quite a process of unraveling from these attachments, these beliefs, and these emotions and memories. So as I mentioned, this is a process, we're in a process right now where we are able to see our deeper selves, where we are able to go deeper. We have more senses to work with. We have more emotions. We're becoming more attuned. We're becoming more aware, which is beautiful. However, on the flip side of that, we are becoming very aware, which stirs up a lot of fear and worry and negativity and anger. And we can sometimes feel those emotions and those thoughts and those beliefs even more than ever before, because we are becoming more sensitive. And when we go through the process of shaking up some of these beliefs and some of these attachments and stories, We naturally may feel disoriented, we may feel fragmented, we may feel lost, we may feel depressed, we may feel upset at what we've gone through, we may feel angry at our past, and that is completely normal. So give yourself compassion, give yourself grace, and allow for time to unfold. The process of integration is it's very abstract, it's very nebulous, it's very under the surface. It's something that needs to happen naturally. We cannot force the process of unraveling. We cannot force the process of our change and transmutation and integration and evolution. As long as you're being aware of this, and as long as you are slowly chipping away at these layers and levels, you will see change happen. It will also create greater levels of consciousness, thus, of course, moving you into the higher state of consciousness, into 5D, as you will start to see the greater landscape of humanity from a more macro viewpoint, from a more higher level consciousness of why the world is the way that it is, why humanity acts the way that they do, the natural order of evolution. You will start to feel more compassionate towards your brothers and sisters in the world. You will start to feel more compassionate in relationships and, of course, towards yourself. So there's going to be a great deal of understanding that evolves as we move through this. But first, we must identify what we're holding on to that is anchoring us into this lower form of existence where we have been, and where we've been also historically, not just only in our lives, but where our ancestors have been, where humanity has been, so that we can usher along this process of evolution. So going into some of the examples, the stories of suffering and negativity could be holding on to past pain and trauma. This can result in how emotional baggage keeps us in cycles of suffering. An example could be a past relationship or childhood trauma that fuels resentment or a victim mentality. Another could be living in the past or the future, in constant worry about what happened or what might happen rather than being present. An example could be chronic anxiety about the future, which prevents us from living fully in the now. An example pertaining to resentment and anger: clinging to grudges. The act of holding onto resentment creates a prison of emotional charge, preventing healing. An example could be holding a grudge against someone for years, blocking inner peace and personal growth. Anger can also be seen as a defense mechanism, often masking deeper emotions such as fear or hurt, keeping us stuck in reactive states. An example could be lashing out in anger at a minor issue, when deep down there's unresolved pain or fear. I also would like to add for anger can also be seen as a mechanism within ourselves when we're not living in our full potential, or we are not aligned with our higher self. When we are in alignment with our higher self, with our heart, with our true essence of self, our purity, there is no anger. There is only unconditional love for ourselves, for life, because we are now then aligned with who we are, and we are living our purpose. We are living in alignment. We're living our potential. So anger can be seen as also inner resistance to the fact that we are contained and blocked within ourselves from being all that we can be. Regarding fear and attachment, there could be fear of loss and change. Fear of stepping into the unknown can keep us anchored to old patterns. An example could be staying in an unfulfilling job or relationship because of the fear of stepping into something new. Another could be attachment to material possessions, the attachment to physical objects or status symbols as a way of seeking validation and security. An example could be identifying too strongly with what we own, example, car, house, clothes, as an expression of worth. This would be very much tied with the ego as well. For myself, I remember spending years going through loss and loss and loss of many aspects, many things in my physical world. And it was very hard to deal with. I kept holding on to the loss and not seeing my reactions and seeing my attachments for what they were and the lessons that I was being shown. It wasn't until I fully released from those attachments and began to accept my attachments as something that I was holding on to and not letting go of, rather than freeing up space and accepting my fate or accepting life or being open to something greater. When we hold on to something tightly, it usually represents fear. We can hold on to something for fear of maybe losing our self-worth or a persona that we have built, holding on to something so tightly because we've become attached to it for whatever reason, probably tied to a story or self-worth, but also maybe even fear of just letting go or fear of change. And so when we lose something in the material realm, we're going to also, I feel, in many cases, be taught this lesson over and over and over again until we evolve, until we can move past the material fixation in our world. The next example could be the survival mode mindset. So this could include living for basic needs. So when we focus on surviving, example, paying bills, maintaining relationships for security, we fail to tap into our highest potential. An example could be focusing solely on work and income, neglecting personal growth, relationships, or spiritual fulfillment. Another could be ego-driven decision making, operating from a place of what can I get out of this instead of how can I grow and serve. An example could be a career choice made purely for money rather than personal passion or purpose. I would also like to add, when we know we're on the right path, it feels right deep within our heart and deep within our, not only soul, but our body. Our body is constantly communicating. And I remember for years, I was on a path not listening to my heart, and I shoved it so down deep inside that I was operating out of my ego persona, out of a story that I had been perpetuating for many years, but I was miserable. I got used to the feeling of being miserable, and I got used to shoving my intuition down and the sensations that my body was signaling. And I opted for staying on track for a certain level of success based on the story that I had been already perpetuating for most of my life. Eventually, it all caught up with me, and I learned some pretty hard lessons through that exercise. I also want to add in here, in the survivalistic mindset, we can also become very fixated on our body and our health and what's wrong and being sick. This can also tie us into the 3D consciousness, lower density consciousness, where we may be fixated on what's wrong with us. We may also spiral into fear and into holding on to illnesses, aches, and pains. And so remember, everything is energy as well. When we have a lot of energy placed, if it is anger, frustration, resentment, fear, especially, we are not allowing for spaciousness to start to open and evolve, allowing for us to move into something greater and letting go of these attachments that we're holding on to. And the body, the physical self, could be part of the story as well. How this prevents evolution is stagnation. So remaining stuck in the 3D keeps us from tapping into higher states of consciousness and spiritual growth. For example, we may avoid comfortable truths or growth because we don't want to challenge our limited self-image. Another could be attachment to false identities. When we identify too closely with the ego, job, relationship, appearance, we block the evolution of our true self. An example is self-worth based on external validation, likes, comments, achievements, rather than inner peace and authenticity. As I record this video, we are in 2025. I've recorded many videos on the universal year number 9 in 2025 and what it means. As a collective, we can grab hold of this opportunity in 2025 and look at our attachments and understand what we are holding on to, if it is mental, if it is in the unconscious self, if it is emotional, if it's from a belief, or if it's something physical. We also have that South Node in Virgo, which is going to teach us some hard lessons to the stories that we are holding on to, the beliefs that we're holding on to, the overanalyzing, using our mind too much rather than our heart. There may be some hard lessons on a collective level or even as an individual that we may have to learn in order to understand this process. And truthfully, we have to go through this in order to really get it, in order to understand it, in order for it to almost sink in a way where we can fully grasp the complexities and the dynamics of this relationship. So being in 2025, we are in a year 9, as I mentioned, and this is going to offer us a profound exercise opportunity to understand the art of letting go. When we let go to some of these old behaviors and ways of being and stories and thoughts and emotions, there's then the void that is created. This void is almost a scary place to be. because we are used to generally being in our old ways. We're used to holding on. We're used to being comfortable with our patterns, comfortable with our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, our stories, even relationships that aren't very healthy. We can get very comfortable and solidified in those relationships and in those stories. So it takes a lot of courage. It takes a fair bit of time, and it takes a lot of dedication to start to transition from what has been familiar into something of limitless possibilities. Now, a lot of us don't even know what limitless possibilities are, how that feels, what that represents. Well, it feels like we can let go and we can breathe. And when we move into that state, we feel lighter, we feel more expansive, more empowered, more confident, more clear and aligned. And this is where we get to manifest. This is where we get to trust. We can actually let go and stop holding on and being in fear and waiting for the worst case scenario, the worst case outcomes. Being in 3D is, as I mentioned, survivalistic mode in many different ways, and it creates many different emotional reactions. It creates many attachments. Imagine yourself letting go of all of that and what that could feel like. A lot of us have not been here yet at all. And so it's a new feeling, it's a new sensation, and a lot of us are learning as we go. But all we need is commitment, confidence, and step-by-step approach to understand these patterns and how it feels and how it's playing into our life and what we're holding on to and how we can let go just a little bit more and change the script on some of these familiar stories so that we can write a better future. And we learn as we move along the feelings of what it feels like to trust. What does it feel like to let go? What does it feel like to not have drama or anger or resentment or holding on to the past, freeing up all that space for something greater? Now, when we free up all that space, what do we get? We get more out of life. Our old self will pull us back into our old patterns because that's what we're familiar with. So this is a bit of oscillation and figuring this out, as I mentioned, as we move along. But over time, we will become more familiar with moving into this 5D consciousness and moving into a greater state of evolution, what it feels like to trust, what it feels like to be aligned, and also what it feels like to be completely empowered within oneself, because that is where we are unshakable. When we're in fear, and I've mentioned this before, when we are in fear, when we're holding on to these stories, when we're in anger and resentment and stories of the past and patterns of the past, we're in fear and we're holding on to something. And we can be very hypervigilant in that state. We can be on guard. We can be ready to fight. There could be drama. There could be an inner anxiousness and tension within the body. When we let go of that, there's going to be a process of adjustment from our old ways of holding on unconsciously to these stories, to these beliefs, to these physical sensations, and allowing ourselves to relax into something greater. We become actually stronger because we're not so reactive and hypervigilant, and our body isn't always on. Our mind isn't always on. So we're not burning ourselves out, or we're not stressing our body out, or we're not stressing ourselves out. We can relax and become stronger and more empowered and healthier and more resilient. So this does lead to a stronger version of ourselves, but in our old ways and our old conditioning, we almost have a reversed way of feeling about it, that being tough and just toughing through things, or being strong and burying our emotions and suppressing what we can't see or what we don't want to see, is actually tougher and stronger when it isn't the case. And that kind of mentality eventually catches up. And unfortunately, in the worst case scenario, it will catch up in our body, in our health, and eventually erupt in some kind of disease, ache, or pain that could be even, for in some cases, quite terminal. So some tips on how to ascend from 3D consciousness. The first is letting go of attachment, recognizing that we are not our possessions or our past experiences. You can practice detachment by regularly letting go of items that no longer serve you, or by forgiving those who have hurt you. The next one is going to be mindfulness and presence. So shifting from a mindset of survival to one of thriving by being fully present in the moment. You can try meditation, breath work, or mindful practices that bring you back to the here and now. Another is inner work and healing, addressing old wounds, shadow work, and healing past traumas that keep us in the loop of suffering. You can try journaling, therapy, or energy work to clear the emotional blocks and reframing limiting beliefs. The next is forgiveness, releasing resentment and anger towards others and ourselves to create space for healing and expansiveness. To do this, you can practice daily forgiveness through affirmations or visualizations to let go of stored negative emotions. The other is shifting focus to service and purpose, moving from ego-driven motivations to a heart-centered approach. Regularly ask yourself, how can I serve? Instead of, what can I get? And finally, spiritual practices. So embracing practices that help you connect to your higher self and spiritual realms through yoga, meditation, prayer, etc. So start to deepen your spiritual practice with a focus on alignment, growth, and connection to a higher purpose. So as I mentioned, living in the 3D keeps us in survivalistic mode. Now, survivalistic could be fear. Again, it could be the attachments of what isn't working, being in scarcity, lack, low worth, also even anger towards one another and humanity and the way that the world is going. So we can stay in the 3D consciousness, but this only perpetuates where we have been for hundreds of years, for centuries. So we have a time now where we can break these patterns, but it's going to have to happen within ourselves, one by one by one. And then we can move into a greater evolution in this world, which is already happening on many levels. And also, if you are looking for more guidance, additional guidance, I do have the Odyssey of Self over at Substack. You can join me there. Also, the Shadow Project is going to be launching in 2025. There's a wait list that is available if you would like to be notified for that. And I will be guiding you and teaching you along the way to create this great shift within yourself and be part of this great transition in humanity. If you would like access to any of those, the links are going to be in the description area below. I'm wishing you all the best on your journey and beyond. Take care.